Commander Vex Thor of the Kalrathi Dominion stood at the edge of Training Ground Gamma 7, watching his pack of young warriors go through their morning drills with all the enthusiasm of sedated moss. His fur bristled with barely contained frustration. These weren't warriors. These were cubs. Scared, uncertain cubs who flinched at loud noises and couldn't hold a defensive formation for more than 30 seconds without someone breaking rank to ask if it was lunchtime yet. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. And lunchtime was 4 hours ago. "Formation," he barked, his voice echoing across the red sand of the training ground. The 23 cubs scrambled into something that vaguely resembled a combat line. Vaguely, if you squinted, and had consumed several bottles of fermented grain juice beforehand. Little Kresh, barely past his 8th molting, was standing backwards. Again. "Kresh, the enemy is that way." Vex Thor pointed with one massive clawed hand. "But Commander, what if they flank us?" Kresh asked earnestly, his golden eyes wide with innocent confusion. Vex Thor closed his eyes and counted to 10. Then to 20. Then he started over, because he'd lost count while contemplating whether retirement was really such a bad option. He was only 347 years old, far too young to retire. But sweet ancestors, these cubs were going to send him to an early grave. The Kalrathi were known across 73 star systems as fierce warriors, apex predators who had clawed their way to dominance through strength, cunning, and an absolutely terrifying dental structure. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in dense fur that ranged from midnight black to burnt orange, with retractable claws that could punch through standard hull plating and a bite force that could crack a starship support beam. They were magnificent. They were deadly. They were the stuff of nightmares for most species in the galactic community. These cubs, however, were the stuff of nightmares for Vex Thor, and not in the way he would have preferred. "Again," he commanded, watching them attempt a basic flanking maneuver. They immediately crashed into each other like a litter of newborns trying to navigate stairs. Tira, one of the smaller females, accidentally bit her own tail and started crying. Yurvik got his foot stuck in a practice dummy. Somehow, Kresh had managed to face the correct direction, but was now lying down for a nap. This was going splendidly. The problem, Vex Thor knew, wasn't that the cubs lacked potential. They were Kalrathi. The warrior instinct was encoded in their DNA. The problem was that they'd grown up in peacetime, in a society that had been gradually softening around the edges ever since they joined the Galactic Coalition 40 years ago. Their parents didn't teach them to hunt anymore. They learned about conflict resolution and emotional intelligence, and how to properly fill out diplomatic incident reports. Important skills, sure. But try filing a diplomatic incident report when someone's shooting at you. He was about to call for another drill when the comm unit on his belt chirped. He grabbed it with more force than necessary, half expecting another message from command telling him to be more encouraging with the younglings. "Vex Thor," he growled into the device. "Commander, this is Station Control. Your requested consultant has arrived." Vex Thor's ears perked up. Ah, yes. The consultant. Command's brilliant solution to his training problem. Some expert in youth development and education, they'd said. Someone with experience in bringing out the potential in young warriors who lacked traditional motivation. "Send them down," he said, feeling a small spark of hope. Maybe this expert would have techniques he hadn't considered. Maybe they'd trained with the Vraxian military academies, or studied under the warrior monks of Thessia Prime. Affirmative. She'll be there in 5 minutes. Interesting. Female instructors were actually more terrifying than males in most warrior cultures. Vexthor found himself standing a bit straighter, making sure his armor was properly adjusted. Whichever species she was from, he wanted to make a good first impression. The cubs had given up on formations entirely, and were now playing some kind of game that involved throwing sand at each other. He decided to let them. Pick your battles, as the humans said. Besides, they'd straighten up once the consultant arrived. He heard her before he saw her. Wow, okay. Nobody mentioned this planet was basically a desert. I'm going to have sand in places sand should never be for weeks. Oh, hi there, big guy. You must be Commander Vexthor? Did I pronounce that right? I'm terrible with the glottal stops. Vexthor turned and felt his entire world tilt slightly on its axis. She was human, short, barely 5.5 feet tall, wearing what appeared to be completely inappropriate clothing for a training ground. Some kind of colorful wrapped fabric over a simple shirt, lightweight pants, and soft shoes that couldn't possibly provide adequate protection. Her hair, was dark and pulled back from her face, and her skin was that odd pale peach color that humans came in. She was carrying a large bag over one shoulder and had the most bizarrely friendly expression he'd ever seen on anyone approaching a pack of predators. She was also smiling at him, like they were old friends meeting for lunch. "I'm sorry," Vexthor managed, his translator earpiece working overtime to convert his growling language into something she could understand. "There must be some mistake. I requested a military training consultant." "Yep, that's me. Dr. Rebecca Chen, though, please, nobody calls me doctor unless they're being passive-aggressive or I'm at a faculty meeting. Rebecca works great. Becca works even better. Becky, if you're feeling brave, though I should warn you, my mom's the only one who really gets away with that." She stuck out her hand, one of those strange human appendages with 5 tiny digits and no claws whatsoever. Vexthor stared at the hand, then at her face, then at the hand again. "You're a human," he said, because his brain apparently couldn't process anything more complex at the moment. "Last time I checked, yep, I know, we're the weird ones. Smooth skin, forward-facing eyes, only one heart, ridiculously fragile bone structure. We're basically the galaxy's walking joke when it comes to physical specs." She was still holding out her hand, apparently waiting for something. "I'm aware of human physiology," Vexthor said stiffly, though he was suddenly very aware that he could accidentally crush every bone in that hand with the slightest pressure. "What I'm not aware of is why Command sent a human civilian to train Kalrathi warriors." "Oh." Her eyes lit up like she'd just remembered something delightful. "That's actually a super interesting story. So I'm not military, you're right about that. I'm an educator. I've spent the last 15 years working with difficult-to-teach groups across multiple species. Started with human kids back on Earth, then moved into cross-species education about 7 years ago. I've worked with Vraxian hatchlings, Centauri adolescents, even a group of hive mind younglings, which, let me tell you, that was a trip. Anyway, someone in your command structure read one of my papers on motivation techniques in predatory species youth. And here I am." She was still holding out her hand. "You're not going to leave me hanging, are you? The handshake thing is a human custom, I know. But I promise I don't bite." "Well, I do. Technically, we've got those flat omnivore teeth. But they're not impressive enough to do any real damage unless I really commit, and you seem nice, so I probably won't bite you." Was she joking? Vexthor genuinely couldn't tell. He carefully extended his hand and allowed her to grasp it with her tiny fingers. Her grip was firm, which surprised him, and warm, which surprised him even more. Humans were supposed to be fragile. She felt disturbingly solid. "Now," Rebecca said, releasing his hand and looking past him at the group of cubs who had stopped throwing sand to stare at the strange newcomer. "Those must be my students. Oh my God, they're adorable." Vexthor's brain made a sound like a skipping audio file. "They are warriors in training," he corrected, perhaps more sharply than necessary. "Not adorable." Right, warriors. Got it. Fierce, deadly apex predators of the Kalrathi Dominion. She was walking toward the cubs now, completely unconcerned by the fact that she was approaching 24 creatures that could quite literally tear her limb from limb. But also objectively adorable. Look at their little ears. The fluffy one has spots. Spots. That's Kira. And those spots mark her as a member of the Highland clan, a heritage of proud warriors going back 17 generations. She's also adorable. These things can both be true, Commander. The cubs watched her approach with wide eyes. Several of them had dropped into defensive crouches, their instincts kicking in despite their lack of training. Good. At least they recognized a potential threat when they saw one. Except Rebecca wasn't acting like a threat. She was acting like what? Vexthor watched in bewilderment as she walked right up to the group and dropped her bag on the ground with a heavy thump. "Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca, but you can call me Becca. I'm going to be helping Commander Vexthor with your training for a while. I know I look weird. I know I don't have claws or fangs or impressive fur. I know I'm basically what your species would consider a snack with legs." She said this cheerfully, like being potential prey was a minor inconvenience rather than a fundamental vulnerability. "But I promise you, we're going to have so much fun together." The cubs looked at each other, then at Vexthor, then at Rebecca. Then Kresh, that backwards-facing menace to proper formations, tilted his head and asked, "Are you food?" "Kresh," Vexthor roared, but Rebecca just laughed. "That's actually a very reasonable question, Kresh, is it? I'm technically edible, sure, but I taste terrible. Humans have this weird chemical composition that most predators find really unappetizing. Plus, I'm pretty sure eating a coalition consultant would be a diplomatic incident, and nobody wants that kind of paperwork." Several cubs made sounds that might have been laughter. Vexthor felt control of the situation slipping through his claws like water. "Dr. Chen," he began. "Becca." "Dr. Chen," he repeated firmly. "Perhaps we should discuss your methods before you interact with the cubs. They are unpredictable, and while I'm sure you're experienced with various species, Kalrathi youth can be particularly aggressive when faced with unfamiliar." He didn't get to finish his sentence, because Tira, the small female who'd bitten her own tail earlier, suddenly made a chirping sound and bounded forward. She didn't attack. She didn't threaten. She ran straight up to Rebecca and pressed her fuzzy head against the human's leg, making a sound that was disturbingly close to purring. "Oh," Rebecca said softly, reaching down to gently touch Tira's head. "Well, hello there, sweetie. Aren't you brave?" And then, as if some invisible dam had broken, 6 more cubs broke from the group and rushed toward Rebecca. Not attacking, not even being aggressive. They were acting like cubs with a trusted adult. Kira pressed against Rebecca's other side. Jervik sniffed curiously at her bag. Little Kresh abandoning his backward stance entirely, grabbed onto her hand and examined her fingers with fascinated chirps. 3 others formed a loose circle around her, tails wagging, ears perked forward in obvious interest rather than threat. Vexathor stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. In 3 months of training, he had never seen the cubs approach anyone voluntarily. They obeyed him out of fear and respect for authority. But they never approached, never showed affection, never dropped their nervous, uncertain guards. This human, this tiny, fragile human who'd been on the training ground for less than 5 minutes, had just accomplished what he'd been trying to do for 12 weeks. She'd made them feel safe. "Commander," Rebecca called over the heads of the cubs, now swarming around her, like she was the most fascinating thing they'd ever seen. "I think we're going to get along just fine. Do you have any objection to me running a few exercises?" Vexthor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No objection." "Great. Okay, everybody, listen up." Rebecca's voice shifted slightly, taking on a tone of friendly authority that somehow made all the cubs settle down and look at her attentively. "We're going to play a game. It's called Capture the Flag, and it's from Earth. Has anyone here played Capture the Flag before?" Heads shook, ears perked forward with interest. "Perfect. So here's how it works." For the next 20 minutes, Vexthor watched in stunned silence as Rebecca Chen, human educator with no military training whatsoever, organized his pack of disaster cubs into 2 functioning teams and ran them through a tactical exercise that incorporated stealth, teamwork, strategic thinking, and basic combat maneuvers. She did it without raising her voice once. She did it without intimidation or threats. She did it by making it fun. The cubs who couldn't hold a formation to save their lives were suddenly coordinating flanking maneuvers. Kresh, who spent half of every session facing the wrong direction, was scouting ahead with focused intensity. Tira, the nervous tailbiter, was leading a stealth team around the perimeter with confidence that seemed to come from nowhere. They were learning. Actually learning. And more importantly, they wanted to learn. How? Vexthor found himself standing next to Rebecca as she watched the cubs execute a pincer movement that he'd been trying to teach them for 6 weeks. "How are you doing this?" Rebecca didn't look away from the cubs. "They're scared, Commander. That's been your problem. They're scared of failing, scared of disappointing you, scared of looking weak in front of each other. Fear makes humans freeze up, and I'm guessing it does the same to Kalrathi cubs. But they should have warriors' courage. They're children." Rebecca cut him off, but her tone was gentle. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear, and you can't expect them to develop courage if they're terrified all the time. They need to feel safe before they can feel brave. Safe in warrior training." "Safe with their instructor," Rebecca corrected. "Safe knowing that if they fail, you'll help them learn rather than punish them. Safe knowing that mistakes are part of growth, not signs of weakness." Vexthor watched Kira successfully capture the opposing team's flag and let out a roar of triumph that made his chest swell with pride. The other cubs roared with her, celebrating their teammates' success. When was the last time they'd celebrated together? "On Earth," Rebecca continued, still watching the cubs with that soft expression humans got when they looked at things they cared about. "We have this saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. These cubs don't need a harder taskmaster, Commander. They need someone who believes in them." "I do believe in them," Vexthor protested. "I know you do. I can see it. But do they know?" When was the last time you told them they did something well? Vexthor opened his mouth to respond and realized he couldn't remember. He corrected their mistakes. He pushed them to be better. He demanded excellence because they were capable of excellence. But praise? Encouragement? Those seemed like soft things, things that would make warriors weak. Except Rebecca was getting better results in 20 minutes than he'd gotten in 3 months. "This is a human tactic," he said, trying to understand. "Your species is social, pack-bonded. You raise your young communally with positive reinforcement. But Kalrathi culture is different. We are predators. We learn through challenge and dominance." Rebecca made a non-committal sound. "And how's that been working for you?" Vexthor didn't have a good answer for that. The game ended with Team Blue's victory, and Rebecca called all the cubs together for what she called a debrief. She had them sit in a circle, had them talk about what worked, what didn't work, what they learned. She asked questions. She listened. She praised specific actions. "Kresh, that scouting run you did in the second round was brilliant. You stayed low, used the terrain for cover, and gave your team critical intelligence." Kresh's ears went back in pleased embarrassment. "I was just looking for the flag. That's what scouting is. And you did it naturally, without anyone telling you how. That's talent." By the time she finished going through each cub's contributions, every single one of them was sitting taller, eyes bright, tails swishing with barely contained pride. "Same time tomorrow?" Rebecca asked, standing and brushing sand off her clothes. The cubs erupted in enthusiastic affirmations. Several of them bounded over to press against her one more time before heading toward the barracks. Vexthor intercepted the last few stragglers. "Report to the cleansing stations and then to the meal hall. Training resumes at dawn." "Yes, Commander." They actually said it in unison. When had they started responding in unison? Once the cubs were out of earshot, Vexthor turned to Rebecca. She was packing up her bag, still smiling that incomprehensible human smile. "I admit," he said slowly, "that was more effective than I anticipated. You thought I'd be useless. I thought you would be eaten." She laughed, a sound that was surprisingly pleasant despite coming from a species he'd previously considered mostly harmless. "Fair enough. To be honest, I wasn't sure how it would go either. I've worked with predator species before, but never Kalrathi. You guys have a reputation." "As do humans," Vexthor said, "though not the one you might expect." "Oh?" He gestured for her to walk with him toward the command building. "Humans are considered odd by most of the galactic community. Weak but stubborn. Fragile but persistent. Your species has no natural weapons, no armor, limited physical capabilities compared to most spacefaring races. And yet you've survived everything the universe has thrown at you. Predators on your homeworld that should have wiped you out. Environmental conditions that would kill most species. You've made it to the stars through nothing but stubbornness and refusal to accept limitations." He looked down at her. "You're not warriors, but you might be something more dangerous." "What's that?" "Unkillable." Rebecca laughed again. "I mean, we're definitely killable, very killable, embarrassingly killable, actually. But we're pretty good at surviving, despite that, I'll give you that." They walked in silence for a moment before Vexthor asked the question that had been nagging at him. "Why did they run to you?" "What do you mean?" "The cubs, when you arrived, they ran to you. They've never done that with anyone. Even with their parents, Kalrathi cubs are more reserved. But they ran to you like I was safe." Rebecca finished quietly. It's a human thing, I think. We're not threatening. We don't trigger predator instincts in most species because we're so obviously not a physical threat. And cubs, they're smart. They can sense when someone genuinely likes them. I walked in there thinking your students were amazing, and they picked up on that immediately. You think a pack of untrained Kalrathi cubs are amazing. Are you kidding? They're incredible. Do you know how smart they are? That tactical awareness they showed in the game? Most human kids their age couldn't pull off half of that. Your species has natural abilities that are frankly unfair. They just need someone to help them recognize that they're not starting from a deficit. They're starting from a place of incredible potential. Vexthor felt something uncomfortable in his chest. Guilt, maybe? Or was it hope? I have been too hard on them. You've been training them the way you were trained, Rebecca said. That's natural. But here's the thing about peacetime cubs raised in a softer society. They need different motivation. They don't have the survival pressure that made your generation fierce. They need to find their own reasons to be strong. And games provide that? Games, praise, clear objectives, and someone who believes they can succeed. Yeah, those things provide that. Over the following weeks, Vexthor watched his training program transform. Rebecca came every day, always with that oversized bag full of incomprehensible human items. She brought something called stickers, which were small adhesive images that the cubs collected with the intensity of treasure-hunting pirates. She brought a portable audio device that played music, which apparently helped with rhythm and coordination during drills. She brought snacks from her homeworld, which the cubs approached with fascination and suspicion in equal measure. "What is this?" Kira asked, sniffing a brown square Rebecca had called a brownie. "Chocolate." Well, chocolate adjacent. The real stuff is toxic to about half the species in the galaxy, so this is a safe synthetic version. Tastes pretty good, though. Kira took a careful bite, her eyes widening. It's sweet. Yep, humans love sweet things. Evolutionary advantage from being fruit eaters way back in our development. Also, sugar gives you energy, so I figured growing cubs could use it. Soon, Vexthor found himself learning a completely new vocabulary. Positive reinforcement. Growth mindset. Intrinsic motivation. Psychological safety. Rebecca threw around these terms like they were basic tactical concepts. And somehow, impossibly, they worked. The cubs who couldn't hold a formation now moved like a coordinated unit. The cubs who flinched at loud noises now roared with confidence. The cubs who asked if it was lunchtime during drills now trained with focused intensity. And they did it all while laughing, playing, enjoying themselves. Vexthor had never considered that warriors could be forged through joy. It's not that joy makes them soft, Rebecca explained one evening as they reviewed the day's progress. It's that joy makes them resilient. Happy cubs become happy adults. Happy adults can handle stress, trauma, and challenges better than unhappy ones. You're not making them soft. You're making them mentally strong. My instructors would have called this coddling. Your instructors lived in a different time. The galaxy is changing, Commander. The Kalrathi are still warriors, but you're not fighting for survival anymore. You're part of a coalition. Your cubs need different skills. They need to know when to fight and when to negotiate, when to be fierce and when to be diplomatic. You can't teach those nuances through fear alone. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into Rebecca's tenure, something happened that crystallized everything for Vexthor. They were running an advanced stealth exercise. The cubs had to navigate a maze of obstacles without being detected by sensor drones. It was difficult, intentionally so. Vex Thor watched from the observation platform as one cub after another made it through with varying degrees of success. Then, Kresh's turn came. Little Kresh, who'd spent the first 2 months of training facing backwards and napping during drills. He approached the course with visible nervousness, his tail tucked close to his body. "You can do this, Kresh," Rebecca called from beside the course entrance. "Remember what we practiced? Low center of gravity. Use your ears, not your eyes. Feel the vibrations." Kresh nodded, took a breath, and entered the course. He was beautiful. Vex Thor watched in stunned pride as the small cub moved through the obstacles like water, flowing around corners, freezing when sensors swept past, timing his movements with instincts that had clearly been there all along, just waiting to be believed in. He made it through without triggering a single alarm. When he emerged on the other side, the entire pack erupted in cheers. Rebecca was applauding, which seemed to be a human gesture of celebration. Kresh stood there, stunned, like he couldn't quite believe what he'd accomplished. Then Tira tackle-hugged him, and suddenly all the cubs were celebrating together. And Vex Thor realized that somewhere along the way they'd stopped being a group of individuals and had become a pack. A real pack. Did you see that? Rebecca was beside him, practically bouncing with excitement. Did you see what he did? That freeze at marker 7? That's advanced level awareness. He's a natural. I saw, Vex Thor said quietly. I have been seeing, Rebecca, all of them. I have been seeing what they can become. What they're becoming, Rebecca corrected. They're already on their way. That night, Vex Thor filed his weekly report to command. He included Rebecca's techniques, the improvements in pack cohesion, the dramatic increase in successful drill completion rates. He recommended that her contract be extended indefinitely. The response came back within hours. Approved. Dr. Chen has been assigned as permanent consultant to Training Ground Gamma 7. When he told Rebecca the next morning, she grinned. Guess you're stuck with me, Commander. I believe, Vex Thor said carefully, that this pack is fortunate to have you. As am I. Oh, are we having a moment? This feels like a moment. Should I hug you? I feel like maybe I should hug you, but you're very large and I'm not sure of the protocol. Humans hug their commanders. Humans hug everybody. We're weird like that. Fair warning, we also cry at the end of movies and get emotionally attached to small animals that can't possibly survive in our care. We're basically disasters held together by stubbornness and coffee. I do not know what coffee is. Oh, Commander, we need to fix that immediately. 3 months later, Training Ground Gamma 7 hosted a demonstration for command. The pack of cubs, now well on their way to being juveniles, performed a complex tactical exercise that combined everything they'd learned. Stealth, coordination, strategic thinking, combat techniques, and most importantly, trust in each other and their instructors. The performance was flawless. Afterward, High Commander Zareth approached Vex Thor with what might have been approval in his ancient eyes. Your pack has exceeded expectations, Commander Vex Thor. The report of your methods has been controversial, but results speak louder than tradition. Thank you, High Commander, though much of the credit belongs to Dr. Chen. Zareth looked at Rebecca, who was being swarmed by celebratory cubs. The human, yes. She is an odd creature. She is an effective instructor. Zareth watched as Kresh climbed onto Rebecca's shoulders, something that should have been threatening, but somehow looked playful. Perhaps there is wisdom in learning from other species, even the soft ones. Sir, if I may, Vexthor said carefully. I have learned that humans are not soft. They are different. And perhaps that difference is exactly what we needed. Explain. We Kalrathi have always forged warriors through fire, through challenge and dominance and the pressure of survival. And it has served us well. But our cubs are not growing up in the same galaxy we did. They need different fires to forge them. Rebecca Chen provides heat through joy, through belief, through unconditional support. And the result is warriors who are not just skilled, but resilient. Not just strong, but adaptable. Zareth considered this. You believe the human way is superior? No, sir. I believe that combining our ways with human ways creates something new. Something better suited to the galaxy our cubs will inherit. A diplomatic answer. The human has taught you well. After Zareth left, Rebecca extricated herself from the pile of cubs and wandered over to Vexthor. So, she said, that went pretty well. You have transformed my pack. We transformed your pack. I just provided different tools. You did the actual work of believing they could change. I remain uncertain how you achieved this so quickly. Rebecca smiled and looked back at the cubs, who were now demonstrating their favorite techniques to impressed visiting officers. Want to know the secret? Very much. I treated them like they were already the warriors they wanted to become. Not like they were failures who needed to be fixed, but like they were works in progress heading towards something amazing. I saw their potential and reflected it back to them until they could see it themselves. That is all. That's everything. People, cubs, whatever, they rise or fall to meet expectations. If you treat them like they're capable of greatness, they'll reach for greatness. If you treat them like they're disappointing failures, they'll fulfill that prophecy too. Vexthor looked at his pack, these cubs who had seemed so hopeless just months ago, now standing proud and strong and confident. On behalf of the Kalrathi Dominion, he said formally, I thank you, Dr. Rebecca Chen of Earth. Oh, we're doing the formal thing now? Okay. She straightened up in a mock serious pose. On behalf of humanity and our general tendency to adopt literally anything that will let us, I thank you for trusting me with your cubs. Even though I totally understand that first day you probably thought I'd be lunch. I admit the thought crossed my mind. And now? Now, Vexthor said, allowing his lips to pull back in what he hoped was the Kalrathi equivalent of a smile. Now I think you might be the most dangerous human I have ever met. Because of my teaching methods? Because you made me care about lesson plans and feelings, and whether cubs are receiving adequate emotional support. You have weaponized something far more insidious than any blade or gun. What's that? Compassion. Rebecca laughed, that bright human sound that had become so familiar over the past months. You say that like it's a bad thing. It is terrifying, Vexthor admitted. I spent 300 years believing that strength came from hardness. You have shown me that strength can come from softness. That is a fundamental shift in worldview that I am still processing. Well, you've got time to process. I'm not going anywhere. She looked back at the cubs one more time, her expression soft. Besides, I've gotten kind of attached to these guys. Who else is going to make sure they eat vegetables and don't stay up too late reading tactical manuals? They read tactical manuals in their free time. Kira started a book club. It's adorable and also slightly concerning. Vexthor felt that unfamiliar sensation in his chest again. Warmth. Pride. Something that might have been happiness. He had started this assignment believing he was training warriors. He was ending it understanding that he was raising people. People who would become warriors, yes, but also diplomats, leaders, thinkers, and protectors. And he had Rebecca Chen, one small human with no claws and too many feelings, to thank for that. "Rebecca," he said. "Yeah? Would you teach me that coffee thing you mentioned?" She lit up like a star going nova. "Oh, Commander, this is going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Fair warning, though. Once you start with coffee, there's no going back. It's basically legal addiction." "I am willing to take that risk." "That's the spirit. Come on, I've got a portable brewer in my quarters. And maybe we can talk about integrating some Earth literature into the curriculum. I think the Cubs would love The Art of War. Oh, and there's this thing called pizza that I really think needs to be introduced to Kalrathi cuisine." As they walked toward the residential complex, Vex Thor could hear his pack behind them, still celebrating, still laughing, still being the fierce, joyful, complicated individuals they'd become. The human had walked into training. The Cubs had leapt from the pack and run to her. And in doing so, they'd all become something more than they'd been before. Even him, especially him. Humans, he decided, were terrifying in the best possible way.